Welcome to Many Minds Therapy Hub. Today we're going to talk about the relational impacts of trauma.
Yes, and I am very excited to dive into this a bit more because we have talked about trauma in general and how it looks like in different contexts. But I felt like going deeper into what it may look like in relationship is very important.
Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes when our partner or even ourselves are in kind of a trauma response, we don't always recognize that. It might just look like your
Hmm.
partner's being a jerk or pushing you away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the things that comes up with traumas we know is the loss of trust
Yeah.
in people, in the world, in ourselves. And whenever that, you know, trust or lack of trust is triggered, we may kind of vacillate between push and pull. And that's kind of like you're saying, are they being a jerk? Why are they pushing me away? And I've seen that show up quite a lot in my individual clients, in my, the work that I do with couples. Just curious how it shows up for you, Rosie.
Yeah, similar for sure. I think often too, like there's just kind of a we it's hard for us to recognize, like I said, when we're in a trauma response sometimes, like, and I think too, kind of to go back to your point, when we have trauma that starts in childhood, that impacts our view of self and the world a lot more, right? Like if we have insecure attachment in our adult relationships or our caregiver relationships, and that's often makes us feel like, okay, can I trust anybody? Am I lovable? Kind of unconsciously often, right? And then it's harder to build attachment and lean into it.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I like what I want to circle back to what you said. It's hard to recognize that it's actually happening. And the way I see it show up sometimes in work is, one, what type of trauma it is. And we're talking more about relational
Yeah.
trauma. And the way it shows up, and maybe more of blaming or kind of seeing on the other person our own insecurities or trauma responses. Not to say that the other person may not have behaviors or things that come up that actually do trigger and they are valid, but sometimes our own trauma responses are being triggered in ways that we think, oh, what are you doing? It's the other person's blaming fault, when in reality, it may just be something deeper within ourselves. And our perception is like, oh, it's you, I can't trust you.
Yeah.
One example, or you know, do you not love me enough?
Right. For sure. And I think oftentimes there will be kind of things in our partner that trigger or remind us of things that, ways that our caregivers weren't showing up in the ways that we needed them to. Right. And that
Yeah.
can kind of reinforce these feelings of like, I need to protect myself in the ways that maybe that worked somewhat and allowed me to kind of get through feeling alone or feeling unsafe.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What is one example that you can give people so that it's not so abstract?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I think oftentimes what I've seen is, they talk, I don't know if I mean, obviously you have, but you, the listener, I don't know if you've heard of kind of this concept of like fight, flight, or fawn or
Mhm.
freeze, right? So oftentimes, if somebody's kind of natural trauma response is to freeze and fawn, right? That might look like they have a part of them that kind of comes up that's just shuts down their needs and tries to appease the other person, right? And then you find yourself in an unbalanced relationship where you find yourself feeling really alone because it hasn't felt safe for you to really show your partner your deeper needs or what's not working for you. And I think on the other end, too, I think sometimes that can look like withdrawal, right? Where maybe it feels like our partner doesn't care because they're kind of withdrawing and like overly fixated on screens or video games or whatever, right? But I think oftentimes that's like their way of kind of moderating their sense of disconnection in childhood, right? Is like maybe they didn't have
Mhm.
parents that knew how to emotionally be available. And so they
Mhm.
tried to shut down that need unconsciously by kind of a numbing behavior.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of, oftentimes, when you see someone like withdrawing, like you're saying, not always, often, a lot of shame or guilt or feeling less than can be some of those feelings that are being, or emotions that are being kind of like numbed and pushed away, or trying to be managed by the screen, like you said. Or, I'm going to go and disconnect with, I don't know, people that do, drugs or alcohol, or let me get into a hobby that, doesn't necessarily requires me to connect with you now. So then, the other person experiences that as that coping strategy, as, okay, you really don't care about me in this relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. For
And
sure.
then that kind of circles more of that, trauma response on the other person. So now we have two people that are battling their own triggers.
Yeah, for sure. And I think oftentimes too, like maybe when one partner's withdrawing, the other partner is more critical. So it might look like nagging, right? I hate that word,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
but
But
really,
people use it.
yeah. And I think
Mm-hmm.
often it's our way of kind of protesting disconnection. They call that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're trying to pull the other partner back in and connect, so that we can connect with them because we're feeling lonely.
Mm-hmm.
It might on the surface be like nagging about doing the dishes or taking out the trash, when in reality, kind of underneath that, there's a sense of like, am I alone here? Do I even matter to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Kind of a way of, yeah, having some sort of like connection, like that need met. Yeah.
Yeah.
Feeling like you're in a partnership when the other person is actually trying to battle their own demons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. And sometimes, the other partner might have kind of multiple parts that show up.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe sometimes they are trying to
Mm-hmm.
your needs or your expectations, and then when
Mm-hmm.
when there's kind of a sense, there might be other parts that feel like, oh, it's never enough, or whatever, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
puts them in a space of like trying to push away the shame that can come up from them for them around
Mm-hmm.
feeling like I can't ever please you, or I think that's
Mm-hmm.
often unconsciously
Yeah.
what's going on for withdrawers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Which also can trigger another trauma response that is seen relationally, and that's like that helplessness that
Yeah.
that comes up, right? I
Yeah.
really feel helpless here. There is nothing I can do to either bring myself out. Maybe I don't know that I need to bring myself out, or, to please you, like you said, or like have your needs met.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Especially when you have kind of years of being stuck in a
Mm-hmm.
cycle that you don't know
Mm-hmm.
how to get out of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think too, sometimes, you know, and I think it's Richard Schwartz talks about, the creator of internal family systems, kind of talks about how um sometimes we have this mission to like try to get our partner to, like shut down parts of themselves that trigger us. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we try to like suppress our own parts that may
Punishing.
feel unlovable to us. And then other times we can kind of get into this space of feeling like, okay, I just need to try to not need anything from this person. And, often just kind of all of those things, right? Like we don't know how to really connect from our truest selves in a vulnerable way because we're stuck in kind of protective stances.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is really sad on, each one of those is pretty sad. And the last one that you mentioned, um, seems to be a very lonely world, right? If you live in a world where you've learned that reaching out doesn't work and that your needs will not be met in a relationship, and now you have to numb those needs or manage those needs with whatever because you feel like, okay, I really cannot have any needs met by this person. Ends up being a very lonely world for someone, which creates, more trauma over trauma, right?
Yeah.
Because now you're on a daily basis, in a relationship with someone who is not meeting your needs, and you feel like I can't really do anything about it, and I can't reach out, so I'm not gonna need anything from you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think oftentimes like being able to kind of get out of that cycle often requires like not only understanding and empathy for kind of what's coming up for ourselves and the ability to
Hmm.
lovingly care for ourselves
Hmm.
in whatever's coming up, but also empathy for and understanding for what comes up for our partner, right? Like if I understand that you're in a trauma response because when I'm critical, it brings up shame for you that then kind of also makes you want to push me away because that's really painful
Hmm.
to sit with that shame. Or sometimes like you're trying to please me and I'm kind of in the stance of still feeling like
Hmm.
afraid that you're going to emotionally withdraw again. So
Hmm.
I'm still like maybe critical, and it's hard for me to kind of let in that you're trying to meet my needs. Then it can help me to have more compassion and understanding for myself and my partner, right?
Right. Yeah. And I just wanted to make a note, this is just coming up for me right now, that we are not talking about extreme cases of trauma where we have like difficult personality disorders,
Right.
because those are like a whole different story. And I just wanted to say that out loud and mention that, because I understand when we're talking about needs, that sometimes depending on the trauma and personality disorders, people may actually right out deny your needs
Yeah.
and refuse to meet your needs. We're talking about more of trauma where we get stuck in these cycles of, I'm trying hard enough to meet your needs. You can see me. I'm trying to manage my own trauma. You can really see that. Or maybe I don't know how to show you that I'm trying to manage. And we haven't necessarily learned how to do that with each other or get out of that cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. And oftentimes too, I think like I mean also abuse is another thing I think we need
Right.
to mention too. If it's an abusive relationship, then there's
Hmm.
it that's not what we're talking about here. And I think that often like there can be really valid reasons for feeling unsafe, right? Especially
Hmm.
an emotional
Right.
a relationship is abusive, of course.
Hmm.
But I think also when we're in a space where maybe our partner has borderline personality disorder or something, for example, right? Like those disorders come from extreme trauma
Right.
usually, right? So
Hmm.
it's like the ways that that person has developed to protect themselves are more extreme because of the amount of trauma that they've gone through. And I think that they often will really need more individual therapy to get through that before they're in a
Right.
space where they're able to even be open to the kind of
Hmm.
intimacy that maybe part of them really longs for,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
or
for
the
sure.
truest self of them really longs for, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I just wanted to like mention that because I feel like
Yeah.
I don't want people to think that we don't see that. And I just wanted to say it out loud for us and for them.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think oftentimes when you're in an abusive relationship, especially like their
Hmm.
gaslighting can be such a part of that. So it can be really
Hmm.
dysregulating, hard to even make heads or tails of like, is this abusive? Is this a relationship that
Hmm.
is, am I feeling unsafe because of my stuff or are you actually unsafe?
Hmm. And that's why I say initially when we opened up, I understand that, with trauma, we lose trust in self, in others, and the world. Not to say that there are behaviors that don't necessarily merit that level of distrust. Like, okay, I can't really trust you. This is not safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's very extreme and very different. Yeah. And
Yeah.
of course, they are not safe at that point if it is abusive. So that would be a different episode.
Yeah, for sure. And often, I mean, it's unethical to be in
Hmm.
couples therapy if you're in an abusive
Hmm.
relationship because you need individual therapy before
Right.
there's enough safety to create safety, right?
Hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, circling right back into our um I like what you were saying about Richard Schwartz and the different parts and how they protect, you know, themselves in their relationship, and the ways that we end up managing our own trauma responses in relationship and how that shows. And then we were talking about how lonely that felt, or I was saying how lonely that felt.
Yeah.
That was, yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it alternates, right? Like there might be
Mm-hmm.
moments where I am both trying to get my partner to like show up how I need him to, and moments when I'm also trying to suppress like parts of me that I feel like are too much or unpalatable
Mm-hmm.
for some reason. Yeah. And
And that can come from a place of like knowing your impact in a relationship.
yeah.
Right? If I'm trying to manage, this is how I like to be taken care of, or this is how I want you to show up for me. And I also know that sometimes this may actually be a trigger for you, or this will have an impact that not necessarily will get the results I want. That's not necessarily, you know, a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like you can be aware that the way that you protect yourself or a protective part of you shows up in your
Mm-hmm.
relationship is harmful to your partner or triggering to your
Mm-hmm.
partner, and hold compassion for why that comes up for yourself without
Mm-hmm.
having to act from that place, if that makes sense, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
okay to take accountability. I think it's just like really hard to or it can be easy to kind of slip into this space of like now another part of me is like shaming me when I'm like trying to.
Now that's where the trauma response comes in, and that's where it becomes really difficult for people to manage, right? Because I can acknowledge that there is a part of myself that maybe I need to tend to right now because my partner may not be able to tend to, without shaming that part and being, holding that part with compassion, like you said. But now if we feel guilty, we have shame, now we feel less than that. That's where it gets really challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you're able to kind of tend to and uh lovingly show up for these parts of you that are really afraid, it allows you to show up in a space that is more, they talk about like self-led, right? Like more in a space of like, this is who I truly am. This
Mm-hmm.
is the highest version of who I really am, or the truest version of me. And I think when we're in that space, it's safer for our partners to come closer often, right?
Yeah.
When they're,
So it feels more contained, more within, if we're going to use the word controlled, which is the opposite of what happens whenever we have a trauma response. And it's that kind of like, oh, I don't have control of this.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I think of IFS as kind of creating internal secure attachments, right? Like with these parts
Mm-hmm.
of ourselves that
Mm-hmm.
create, or that have tried to keep
Mm-hmm.
safety for us. And then when we're in a space where we have that kind of
Mm-hmm.
harmony and secure attachment with ourselves, then it's easier to let people close. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel like I'm going to, you know, lose all of who I am if this relationship doesn't work, right? Like our lives
Mm-hmm.
aren't fine in the same way. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. 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 just the opposite. I know you keep saying the good things, and then I'm like, okay, the opposite of
Right.
when we're in trauma response, and we can have that kind of like contradictory feelings too, right? And maybe we don't have that internal secure attachment, like you said, or feel like we can be in a secure attachment with our partner. So like that ability to hold intimate relationships, that's when it's compromised, right? Because I have this need, but then I have this fear, I have this need, but I have this shame, I have this need, but I can't control. So that is, you know, that we may see it in our partner differently, right? We may see, like you use the word nagging, or you may see trying to like cling, or, you know,
Yeah.
seek closeness a lot more than you typically may see your partner trying to get close to you, or the other way, you know, push you more than typically they would, because nothing feels safe in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes when people are withdrawing, there is a sense of like never enoughness that can kind of
Mhm.
be connected to that, where like maybe I really want to have a connected relationship, but I don't know how to emotionally be vulnerable because I wasn't taught, or because,
Mhm.
I'm trying to show up and I feel like my partner doesn't see my efforts. Like,
Mhm.
kind of bring up that hopelessness you talked about.
Yeah, yeah. Or it triggers a lot of anxiety, and sometimes people don't know how to manage anxiety
Yeah.
in relationships, and being vulnerable and getting close to someone can be kind of anxiety provoking if you don't know how to do it, or if you've never done it, or if you had bad experiences, you know,
Yeah.
in
Or if you
relationships. Mhm.
have a cycle with your partner of in the past not being
Mhm.
safe to need them, right? Like if
Mhm.
there's a history of kind of being stuck in the cycle where it didn't feel like if I
Mhm.
reach for you, you're going to meet my need, or you're going to see my reach and be available, then it can kind of bring up this anxiety of like, I want to be close to you. And also, this feels really scary. And I don't know that you're going to
Mhm.
meet my need,
Mhm.
or that I can trust that you'll
Mhm.
keep meeting my need, you know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay, this has been great, Rosie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Fun topic. I think it's really relatable. I think
mm,
most humans don't grow up with secure attachment and don't really
mhm.
know have the kind of intimacy that they long for in
Mhm.
relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they long it, but they don't know how to get it or how to build it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is very difficult when it comes to, yeah, growing up with insecure attachment, or some sort of like trauma, relationship trauma
Yeah.
throughout lives. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, this was great. I'm looking at our time as usual.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we can wrap it up here. And we shall continue with some other topics, or maybe this one next time we see each other.
Yeah. And if there's anything in particular you're curious
Mm-hmm.
about, feel free to drop it in the
Mm-hmm.
comments and subscribe or like the
Yeah.
video. um yeah, and if you want to be notified about future videos, you can hit the bell and subscribe.
Yes. Yeah. And we'll be happy also to expand on topics, as long as, you know, it is within our scope.
Yeah, scope
Uh,
of knowing things.
knowing,
Scope of competence, scope of everything,
knowing. I
all of
like the
it.
knowing part. Okay. Bye bye, everyone. Until next time.
Bye.